Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, I'll look back at a World Championships in Zurich, which produced two very worthy winners in the elite races, albeit done in two very different styles. I'll also be looking back at the entire week, which unfortunately was overshadowed by an awful tragedy. This week in the world of racing, we learned that there'll be a women's Milano-San Remo next year for the first time since 2005. RCS Sport announced the news last week, confirming that the race will take place on the morning of the men's, which is fantastic news. We also learned that pro riders from the top two divisions will no longer be able to compete in the Under-23 World Championships as of next year. That discounts any rider contracted with a world or pro team and would have ruled out 7 of the top 10 at this year's race, but not the winner. More on that a little bit later on. And finally, we learnt that Tadej Pogačar just completed the best season ever ridden in male pro cycling, and he's not even finished yet. His win yesterday in Zurich meant that he was only the third rider in history to do the Triple Crown, that being the Giro d'Italia, Tour de France and World Championships in the same year. Only Eddy Merckx and Stephen Roche had achieved that feat before, with Roche the last one 37 years ago. But neither of them did it in quite the style that Pogačar did yesterday. Now, we all knew he was the favourite before the start of the race, and so did everybody in the race. We all expected a fairly long-range attack, so did all his competitors, but none of us expected an attack that came over 100 kilometres still remaining. I'm still finding it hard to believe what I'm saying 24 hours later. Pogačar attacked with about 103 k's to go, and none of the favourites tried to follow him. The only rider who did follow was Italy's Andrea Baggioli, and he succumbed to the pace soon after. Now, in the unlikely event that you didn't catch the race yesterday, I should point out that he was attacking behind what was quite a dangerous move in front. Jay Vine of Australia had lit the blue touch paper around 20 k's earlier, pulling away a group that contained the likes of Cataneo, Lipovic, De Plus, Sivakov, Court, Williams, and crucially, Jan Tratnik of Slovenia. The formation of that group led to an interesting dynamic behind them. So the only major team not represented up there were the Netherlands, and they appeared nonplussed about that. They were pulling out the card of, we're not the favourites here, guys, so it's up to you if you want to control and try and win this race. Which sort of worked. When the gap had quickly gone up to 3 minutes, Slovenia set to work, and Doman Novak pulled a big chunk of that time back. But I couldn't believe it when Pogačar went. Just after Primož Roglič himself had put some fires out for Slovenia, Pogačar went down the left-hand side of the road, and there was just no reaction really. Simmons latched on as Pogačar came past, briefly at least, but soon he was dropped, and everyone else was caught napping. Now, it'd be easy to think that nobody could go with him, but I watched it back, and I don't think that was the case. Yes, it was a searing acceleration, but given what we saw of Van der Poel and others later, I think some people could have followed. They just decided not to. Now that might have been down to bad positioning, as seemed to be the case for Remco Evenepoel of Belgium. It might simply have been that the fear of attacking from that far out would be a death wish, something that even Pogačar himself said was stupid in his post-race interview. An important point for him, though, was that Jan Tratnik was in that group ahead. Now, despite the lack of race radios, word did get through to Tratnik of what was happening behind him, and so he soon dropped back to help his teammate latch on. As expected, there weren't many riders particularly interested in continuing to contribute to the pace setting once they saw Pogačar present, and so it was over to Tratnik to do the job of maintaining the gap whilst Belgium worked hard behind. The problem was, the reaction behind just wasn't quick enough in any sense of the word. I mean, I sort of understand that attack would have caught them by surprise, and then there were the usual standoff moments whilst they decided who should be doing the chasing, but by the time all of that had played out, Pogačar had about a minute advantage. And that, as they say, was that. Pogačar dropped everyone in his group the next time up the Zurich Bergstrasse climb, the steepest of the day, then deciding to wait for Pavel Sivakov of France over the top of that climb. 30 Ks or so later, he was on his own. There was a bit of a fright for his fans on the final lap as his lead started to come down towards the 30-second mark, but somehow he found some more reserves of energy to reverse the trend and ride off to his first ever rainbow jersey. Remarkable. There's very little more you can say about him that hasn't already been said at this point. It's a season like no other that I've ever witnessed. Looking back at it, he started 9 different races this season and he's won 7 of them. The only time he didn't finish on the podium was at the Grand Prix Quebec, where he was attacking and subsequently finished 7th. He's racked up 23 wins so far, all of them at World Tour level. And that's just not more World Tour wins than any other rider, but more World Tour wins than any other team by quite some distance. Now, if you remove the 3 general classification wins from his tally, it means that of the 55 days he's raced this year, he's crossed the line first, or been the fastest in time trials, 20 times. That's a 36% win rate. And he's not done yet. He's got 3 more one-day races to do in Italy before he takes a break. And it would be more of a surprise if he doesn't add to his wins than if he does. Beyond that, I don't really know what to say. He's the most deserving world champion you could possibly imagine, and he's done it in the style of the greats. At the start of the season, I think a lot of us scoffed when he said publicly that he wants to be the best rider the world has ever seen. At this point, he's already very close to that, if not already there, and he's only 26. So congratulations, Tadej Pogačar. That was spectacular. Behind him, Ben O'Connor of Australia was having the one-day race of his life, always there without doing too much. He managed to slip away in the closing kilometres to claim the silver medal, and what a season he's had too. 4th at the Giro, 2nd overall at the Vuelta, and now 2nd at the World Road Race Champs. They're going to miss him at Decathlon 82R next season, that's for sure. Now, it felt fitting, didn't it, that Mathieu van der Poel took the bronze medal over a course that many, myself included, thought was too hard for him to win on. He was probably the 2nd strongest rider in the race. He'll be riding the World Gravel Champs this coming Sunday, incidentally. Also more than worthy of a mention is the Latvian, not Lithuanian, as I said somewhat unforgivably on the preview show, Tom Skujins. What a day he had, and what a season he's had. So he was away in pursuit of Pogačar with Ben Healy of Ireland for quite some time, but was still active once caught and managed to get 4th on the day. Real shame actually that he didn't get a medal for his exploits. The rest of the top 10 looked like this. Evenepoel, who was good but not quite on his very best form, took 5th. Hirschi 6th. Healy, Mas and Simmons in 7th to 9th. And then Romain Bardet of France in his last World Championships, rounding out the top 10. On to the women's then, which was held under much less pleasant weather conditions on Saturday. So the Dutch team went into that, as ever, with the strongest team, but also with question marks as to how well they'd ride together and how strong they would be tactically. For quite some time, they were in a great position. Rianne Marcus went up the road with just under 43 k's to go, eventually joined by Justine Kekera of Belgium. And it meant that the likes of Vollering, Vos and Kopecky could sit on the group behind and just follow, whilst Elisa Longo Borghini of Italy took a lot of the responsibility herself to keep the pace high on the climbs. About 10 k's after that, the gap was down to just 5 seconds between those two groups, but a lull in the chase allowed that to extend back out and also allowed another move to go clear. Ruby Roseman Gannon of Australia bridged the gap with Marianne Vos on her wheel, putting the Dutch into a commanding position on the road. 2 riders in a group of 4 at the head of affairs in the World Championships. But that's when things started to unravel for them. So there was a bizarre section with 30 k's to go, where the Dutch were on the front of the chasing group, despite having those 2 riders up the road. With 1 lap to go, the gap between the 2 groups was a minute. 1 climb later, and it was up to 1 minute and 20 seconds. And you wondered whether it was all over. The fight was amongst the first 4. Vos was arguably the fastest rider in that front group, and it looked increasingly likely she might become world champion again 18 years after she first took that crown. However, some concerted chasing behind by Longo Borghini, Dijgert, Lippert and others drastically reduced their advantage, and by the top of the main climb of the lap, Longo Borghini had bridged over to the front with Vollering on her wheel. Vollering then went straight to the front, But all she managed to do was drop Marcus to start with, her teammates, and then Vos soon after that. So the Dutch went from having 2 riders in a group of 4 to 1 rider in a group of 5. Dijkert and Kopecky managed to get back on themselves, and without any major climbs between there and the finish, nobody was able to get a significant gap. Vos and Marcus did manage to get back on themselves as well, but another acceleration by Vollering was the last that we would see of them. That led to a lot of criticism of their tactics after the race, and that's very easy to do in hindsight, isn't it? But part of the problem they always have is they've got a lot of chefs in the kitchen. Multiple riders who could conceivably on their day win, and they've got to try and marry up all of those ambitions, which can't be easy. Regardless, it was always going to be difficult for Vollering to win, given the company she was in leading into the finish, and so it proved to be. Lotte Kopecky of Belgium, who really had to dig very deep to stay in contact with that group, was the favourite to win amongst the leading group, and she had no problems in outsprinting them all at the line to take her 2nd consecutive world title. A brilliant ride by Chloe Dijkert earned her the silver, adding to the bronze that she'd claimed in the individual time trial earlier on in the week, or about a week earlier, whilst Longo Borghini took what was the 3rd bronze medal of her career at a World Championships road race. Liane Lippert finished 4th for Germany. Vollering in the end was the best Dutch woman in 5th, and then it was Rosemond Gannon of Australia, Gekira, who was probably the most valuable player of the day, MVP, Vos, Marcus and Vash. In 13th was Puk Pieterse, but that was enough for her to win the under-23 title ahead of Neve Bradbury and Niedermeyer. So there was something to shout about for the Dutch in the end. Again though, it sort of makes you realise how difficult it is to get everybody working well together when the likes of Pieterse are also thinking about their own race within a race. Thankfully that was obviously going to change this time next year. Apologies for the lack of race footage, by the way. Unfortunately, we don't have any rights to show video from the UCI World Championships this year. Now, unfortunately, it wasn't just the literal clouds that were hanging over Zurich for much of last week. In Thursday's junior women's race, 18-year-old Muriel crashed heavily and sustained a serious head injury. She was treated at Zurich University Hospital, but passed away the following day. Now, I didn't personally know the name Muriel before Thursday, and I'm sure a lot of you watching this hadn't either, but it still hits incredibly hard, doesn't it? There are just no words for it, really. Losing anybody in our small world of cycling is always devastating, and it's just happened far too regularly in the last couple of years. And I've spent the last few days thinking about her parents, really, who must have been amongst the most proud parents in the world, seeing their daughter compete in her home World Championships, only for her to be taken away. My thoughts and my heart are with her family and anyone that knew her. Rest in peace, Muriel. It's always very difficult to know how to move on from sad news like that. In some ways, it feels like it's not the time and place to discuss the wider issue of rider safety, but in other ways, it sort of feels like the right time. I'm starting to get really quite angry about how often this is happening now, and the apparent lack of anything significant being done to address what is clearly a massive problem in our sport. Riders should not be dying. I'm sure many of you are experiencing similar emotions. I will continue though and just wrap up the other races from the Zurich World Championships now. And I'll start with the under-23 men's road race, where it looked for a long time like there might be quite an epic home victory. Jan Christen of Switzerland had gone on the attack from quite a long way out and looked as though he might have the strength to carry it off. However, a chase that was led mainly by Belgium reduced his gap, with Jana Vida doing the majority of the pulling in the chasing group. Probably a bit too much actually, as he then didn't have the strength to go with Nicholas Behrens of Germany when he went on the attack. It was quite the sight really, because Behrens is 1m95 m and quite stocky with it. Not the sort of rider you'd expect to be at the forefront on a course like that. But he really was at the forefront. It's hard to miss him, to be honest, especially amongst a bunch of climbers. Now, the only rider who was able to follow him when he went was Martin Svrček of Slovakia, but he was no match for the German in the sprint to the line. Alex Segaert caught and immediately attacked the chase group to take the bronze medal for Belgium. And in hindsight, maybe if Belgium had rode a little differently, he might have been their best shot at winning the gold medal and therefore the rainbow jersey. In the junior women's race, Kat Ferguson of Great Britain continued her near-perfect season by taking her second gold medal and rainbow jersey of the week. She's only finished off the podium in one race this year, the Grand Prix Stuttgart, in which she was riding against the pros and finished 7th. In every other race that I can see on First Cycling, she's been on the podium, and that includes cyclocross as well. I am really looking forward to seeing how far she can progress in the next few years. But in the meantime, just really hope she gets to celebrate what's been a fantastic season so far. In the junior men's race, Lorenzo Fin of Italy soloed to the win, over 2 minutes ahead of Britain's Seb Grindley. And it was quite interesting listening to Fin's interview after the finish line. So it turns out that his dad is British but moved to Italy, so he sort of speaks in a northern English accent with a bit of an Italian twang. And just finally, Australia won the mixed relay in what was quite a nail-biting finish after a long race. That meant that Grace Brown added yet another title to an increasingly bulging collection, and also meant that Ben O'Connor took 2 medals over the course of the week, so well done to them and the entire team. On to the other races from last week now. There's not a huge amount to report. The Tour de Langkawi did start yesterday though, and it started with a win for Astana and their big sprinter Gleb Syriza. He got the better of Casper van Uden of DSM Firmenich post-NL on that opening stage. In today's stage, there was an early celebration. Manuel Penalva thought he'd got it, but just pipping him to the line was Matteo Malucelli of JCL Team Ucchio. The race continues through to this coming Sunday. Incidentally, if you'd like to catch up on it or watch the remaining stages, you'll be able to find them live and on demand on Discovery Plus or Max, where you can watch a full season of bike racing. Just a couple of bits of other news now. So the Giro dell'Emilia, which takes place this coming Saturday, is well worth tuning in for. It's going to feature Pogačar, Evenepoel and Roglic, amongst many other top riders. Pogačar will then ride Tre Valli Valesini and Il Lombardia, where all 3 of those riders are set to ride again for the final time this season. It's been a slightly quieter week on the transfer front, but there are a couple to report. Valentin Paré-Pant was rumoured to a long time to be leaving AG2R Decathlon and is indeed heading over to Soudal Quickstep, so that was a rumour that was confirmed last week. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan Aulias Olar moves to Movistar after 5 successful years with Caja Rural. And finally, the routes for next year's World Champs in Rwanda were revealed in Zurich last week, and the circuit is even harder than Zurich, at least if that's measured on metres of climbing. So it's going to be the hardest men's race in decades. There's 5,500 metres of climbing over around 270 kilometres. And the UCI also announced a new one-day race in the Tokyo area called the Road Race Tokyo Tama, and indeed confirmed the venues for the next few World Championships. Beyond Rwanda next year, we already knew it was Montreal in 2026 and Haute-Savoie in 27. Then though, it's Abu Dhabi, Denmark and Brussels from 28 through to 30. 2030, that's a scary thought, isn't it? At least if you're my age. Right, that's all for this week, but I'll see you again next Monday.